The door creaked with a sharp click, and the dry sound of the bell cut through the muggy Texas afternoon air. It was a small, inconspicuous shop with dark wood shelves and a fan spinning lazily overhead. Alexa Monroe, 45, crossed the threshold with firm, precise steps, as if she already knew exactly where she was and what she wanted. Nothing about her screamed danger, no uniform, no insignia. Just an ordinary woman, a simple grey t-shirt, faded jeans, her hair pulled back in a functional bun, and a weathered military backpack slung over her back. Yet, as soon as she entered, she felt eyes on her. To the left, near the counter, 4 men briefly interrupted their conversations to assess her with that kind of look that mixes judgment and mockery. One of them chuckled beneath his mustache, the other whispered something and shook his head. Alexa didn't react. She'd experienced much worse looks, even while under fire. But here, inside a gun shop on American soil, the discomfort was of a different kind, invisible but constant. She approached the counter. The attendant, a young man with slicked-back hair and a tactical vest cleaner than his conscience, looked up in boredom. Without hiding his condescending tone, he offered a pink pistol. "Looking for something lighter," he said with a wry smile, as if making a joke the other men would enjoy hearing. Alexa kept her face impassive. Years of service had taught her that overreaction gives away territory, and she wasn't there to fight. She was there for something simple, replacing an old gun inherited from her father. A memento that no longer fired, but carried the weight of a name, a legacy, a family history marked by service and sacrifice. But in that store, none of those faces knew this. To them, she was just another clueless civilian, perhaps a bored bystander or a woman trying to appear more than she really was. No one there could see the soldier. No one there recognized the restrained gestures, the practiced walk, the controlled breathing of someone who had been in combat. And much less did anyone imagine that the woman before them had more hours of live fire than all of them had in the field combined. She asked in a calm voice for a Sig Sauer P226. The attendant didn't hide his surprise and his mockery. "That's too much of a gun for you, miss." The laughter was quieter, but still audible. One of the men in the back cleared his throat as if trying to contain a joke. Alexa crossed her arms. She didn't shout, she didn't argue. She simply responded with a firm look and a string of numbers, a serial number, a code. Something the young attendant didn't understand right away, but which made the manager, an older man who was organizing boxes in the back, stop what he was doing and turn around. "Can you repeat that number?" he asked, his voice firmer now. Alexa repeated it, calmly. And for the first time since he'd entered, the room seemed to cool. The manager walked to the computer, typing with steady fingers, and suddenly, everything changed. His face, previously indifferent, began to drain of color. He looked at the screen, then at Alexa and back at the screen. His eyes widened and his breath seemed to catch for a moment, but no one said anything. No alarms sounded. No announcements were made. The store fell silent again, but something was different now. A tense silence charged with something no one could name, yet. Alexa remained still, as if this kind of discomfort was already familiar. And it was. Because no matter how honorably she had served, no matter how many lives she had saved, no matter how many bronze stars she had earned on a classified mission in Afghanistan, the civilian world had never bothered to remember who she was. But someone there, at that very moment, was about to remember. And when that happened, everything in that store would change, including the way they looked at her. Have you ever felt out of place even though you knew that place should recognize you? Stay with me, because what happens next, no one in that room expected, not even her. The sound of keys being pressed seemed to echo louder than it should. Each click sounded like a distant drum, muffled by the tension that now filled the store's air. The clerk was no longer smiling. The manager, his hands still on the keyboard, paused for a second, as if he'd forgotten how to breathe. Alexa remained there, still centered, as if none of this was new. But inside she was reliving it all, because that serial number wasn't just a number. It was a reminder of the day everything changed. On the screen, the records weren't public. It was internal, limited access, but the manager could recognize the codes, the seals, the information redacted with blackouts and confidentiality symbols. He'd seen this before, once many years ago when a federal agent needed special ammunition for an operation. But this woman was different, because she was there alone, without any institutional protection. Alone, as she always had been. Alexa felt a cold sweat trickle down the back of her neck, but she didn't move. From the outside, you'd think she was calm, but she didn't know what it was like to walk with a heart of lead and memories that weighed like rocks. Every second there was a trigger. The store, with its smells, its coldness, and that kind of silent judgment, was like returning to the day she landed on American soil and realized that here, no one would recognize her. The operation in which her serial number was engraved was called, in official jargon, Dagger Storm, but among the few who survived, it had another name, the day we lost time. Because there in the middle of the desert, when everything went wrong, when the extraction failed, when the helicopter was shot down and silence filled the radios, time vanished, and those who remained learned to fight with their instincts. Alexa was the youngest of the group, and she was the one who returned, with 19 men on her back, carrying 2 at a time, under fire. No one saw, no cameras, no journalists, just sand, blood, and promise. A promise that it would all be worth it one day. That her journey would have purpose, that her courage would resonate, but it didn't. Not after she returned. The military hospital released her with a handshake, a symbolic check, and silence. Her file was sealed. The press never found out. The civilians? They barely looked her in the eye. And now, years later, she had to explain why she wanted a professional-grade weapon. Explain it to a boy who had never held a rifle in the field, who had never felt the weight of a brother falling into his arms. And still, she didn't answer. She let the numbers speak for themselves. Because numbers at least don't doubt. They prove. The attendant returned slowly, a printed sheet of paper in his hands. It was the summary of the record. He didn't understand everything, but enough to know he'd made a serious mistake. The manager cleared his throat, visibly embarrassed. "Wait a minute," he said. He left through the side door, cell phone in hand. Alexa looked at the floor. She knew what was coming. She knew that when the truth begins to emerge, those who once mocked fall silent. But there was no pleasure in it. There was no revenge, only the weariness of someone who always needed to prove what should never have been questioned. A memory involuntarily invaded her mind. The day she returned from the war and was greeted by an administrative discharge envelope, no family members, and a line to drop off her belongings. She remembered the cardboard box with her name written in pen. Inside were her medals, folded among dirty shirts. A woman from the support team offered her a hug. It was the only time Alexa cried, not from the pain, but from the silence. And now, there she was again, on a different kind of front line, one where the enemies don't wear uniforms. They're all smiles, judgments, and assumptions. The shop door opened again. This time it wasn't just any customer. It was a tall, sturdy man wearing a cap with the infantry symbol. He entered slowly, his eyes scanning the room familiarly. When he saw Alexa, he stopped. He took off his cap. He was silent for a moment too long. Then he walked toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. He simply nodded. Alexa returned the gesture with a slight nod, saying nothing. They didn't need words. There was a language only those who have hit rock bottom can speak. It was the language of survival, of pain, of the truth that never made it into the newspapers. And at that moment, without anyone quite understanding what was happening, the manager returned from the back room, his face serious, his eyes welling. "Miss Monroe, I'm sorry." The sentence hung in the air. The men in the back of the store stood up. One of them pulled out his cell phone. He called someone. He simply said, "She's here," and then hung up. Little by little, the atmosphere began to shift, like a silent tide. It wasn't yet clear what was coming, but something was brewing, something she hadn't asked for. But perhaps she needed more than she realized. If you've come this far and felt the weight of this story, write in the comments. Not all silence is empty. There's still a lot to come, and what happens now will shake everything up. The phone behind the counter rang, but no one answered. The sound echoed hollowly, while the store's atmosphere seemed suspended in time, as if something were about to happen, and everyone instinctively knew it. Alexa didn't move. Her eyes roamed the details of the space with an almost calculated coldness. The crooked clock on the wall, the display case with the poorly organized weapons, the faded poster promoting discounted ammunition. To anyone else, it was just another gun store in any town. To her, it was another field where she would have to fight, this time with silence, presence, and resistance. The man in the Marine Corps cap stood motionless beside him, like a sentry instinctively recognizing the scent of truth. And that was what was lingering in the air now. Truth. A hidden truth that was beginning to seep through the cracks of civilian pride, ignorance, and the vanity of those who had never had to prove anything with blood. The door opened again. Another man entered. Then two more. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them asked questions. They just looked at Alexa and nodded. To what exactly, no one knew. But there was something in their eyes, a mixture of reverence, surprise, and perhaps guilt. As if they were right there witnessing something that had long been denied to them all, silent justice. The clerk was trying to keep himself busy by rearranging a shelf that didn't need adjusting. The mocking smile from before had evaporated, and now all that remained was the uncomfortable stiffness of someone exposed to their own ignorance. The manager held Alexa's data sheet as if it were a sacred document. He'd read everything. The operation, the medals, the recommendations, the confidential seals. And yet, it was clear he still didn't fully understand who she was, because what defined Alexa was never on paper. Inside, Alexa forced herself to maintain control. But the memories came back like shrapnel. The ambush in the village, the muffled screams over the radio, the dry sound of incessant gunfire, the suffocating heat of the sand mixed with the smell of iron and gunpowder. She remembered the weight of the sergeant's body, carried for over a mile, his left leg torn by shrapnel, his breath faltering with every step. He died in the helicopter, his head resting on her shoulder like a brother who fell asleep too soon. No one told her that part. No one wanted to know. When she returned, they said the mission couldn't be disclosed. National security issues, they said, and so, along with the silence surrounding the operation, they also buried her name, her recognition, her chance to exist beyond the battlefield. Since then, Alexa has lived on the margins, temporary jobs, constant questioning, an incomplete record that aroused more suspicion than respect. And a backpack, the one now slung across her back, laden with documents no one read, letters no one answered, memories no one wanted to hear. The store clock ticked. The hands seemed slower. And with each passing minute, more men and women began to enter. Some in civilian uniforms, others with faded caps, tattoos on their forearms and worn-out looks. None of them knew her personally. But just seeing her there, her posture, her silence, her firmness, was enough to know they were in the presence of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. Still, the pain lingered, because Alexa wasn't there for a tribute. He wasn't seeking recognition. He simply wanted to exchange an old gun, the same one his father carried when he returned from Korea. It was a simple promise, a way to preserve a legacy, to keep alive the memory of the one who taught you honor. But even this, in the country sworn to protect, seemed to demand explanations. The civilian mindset tended to view heroism as a spectacle, medals on display, prepared speeches, commemorative dates. But the truth is that true heroism is silent, and at times very solitary. The first man to enter, the Marine, approached the counter. He pulled a small metal coin from his jacket. It was a challenge coin, a symbolic coin given between veterans as a sign of respect and brotherhood. He held it out to her without saying a word. Alexa hesitated for a second, then she reached out and took it. Her fingers trembled slightly, but the gesture was firm. That small piece of metal weighed more than any decoration she had ever officially received. Another older man approached. "We've been waiting for you for years, we just didn't know it." His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it was enough for everyone in the store to hear. And there, without anyone planning anything, an invisible circle of protection formed around her. It wasn't a protest. It wasn't a fuss. It was just presence, sisterhood, a silent response to judgment, a shield made of shared experience, of deep scars, of unspoken truths. Alexa looked around and for the first time in a long time allowed herself to take a deep breath without fear. But the most shocking moment was yet to come. Because amid the respectful silence of the store, someone walked through the door in a different uniform. It wasn't military. It was a teenager, maybe 17, wearing a school team jersey, an indecisive expression and expectant eyes. He stopped next to his mother, a woman who seconds before had entered looking for ammunition for training. The boy looked at Alexa as if he recognized a figure he'd seen in some story, some tale, or maybe just sensed. "Is that her, Mom?" The woman nodded. "That's her." Alexa frowned, uncomprehending. But then the boy walked over to her, pulled something from his pocket and held it out with both hands. A worn photo printed on plain paper. In it, a group of soldiers smiled in the desert. In the background, a helicopter. And in the center, Alexa. Younger, but with the same look. "My uncle was one of the ones you saved. He told me about you before he died." The boy's voice wavered. "He said if I ever met you, I should thank you." Alexa held the photo in both hands. He felt the world spin for a second. No words came out, just a barely perceptible nod and a teary look that said it all, and to think it all started with a simple trip to the store to replace an old gun. Right in the comments, some silences say it all. Something important is about to be revealed, and it will completely change the course of this story. The silence in the store was no longer just an absence of sound. It was a pause laden with anticipation, like the exact moment before a storm hits. Alexa stood, her arms crossed restrainedly, as if protecting herself without appearing vulnerable. But her eyes, they seemed to observe everything at once, every hidden expression, every glance, every small hesitation of those who now circled the room with a new caution. The store was no longer the same, and neither was she. The wall of certificates seemed to mock her. Framed faces, all male, all sporting practiced smiles and calculated postures. None of them knew what it was like to be ignored with a medal in their pocket. None of them had to hide their scars because there was no room for them on their civilian resume. Alexa felt her throat tighten, not with anger but with exhaustion. It was as if all the years since her return from Afghanistan had been compressed and shoved into this exact moment. And she once again had to decide whether to swallow it all again or allow herself to feel. The manager reappeared. He didn't have the gun she'd requested. He didn't have any forms. He had people. Beside him, a short, white-haired man with an unreadable gaze held a time-stained envelope. Alexa recognized that look. It was the look of someone who'd seen too much and said too little. He stopped in front of her, glanced at the backpack on her back, and then said, almost in a whisper, "This belongs to you. It's been in storage since 2012. She didn't understand, until she opened the envelope. Inside was a folded military field badge, bearing a faded photograph of a younger woman, her expression firm, her eyes filled with something she couldn't yet name, perhaps faith. And next to it, a yellowed note in the shaky handwriting of a commander she believed had already died. The words were few, but they cut deep. "Monroe, if justice doesn't come one day, at least let the truth find you first. Major DJ Forster." She didn't expect that, and she didn't know what to do with it. For years, Alexa carried a stifled truth. She survived the shootings, the explosions, and the helplessness, but not the silence of her return. She lost friends to suicide, to alcohol, to apathy. She herself nearly lost herself. She's woken up in dark apartments, unable to remember what city she was in. She sat in job interviews where the only question asked was, "But why were you out of the market for so long?" She's heard advice like, "Don't tell anyone you worked," and "That might set you back." But now there, faced with strangers who were beginning to fill the store as if summoned unknowingly, Alexa felt that something was, for the first time in a long time, different. It wasn't comfort yet. It wasn't healing yet, but it was the beginning of something. A glimmer of respect finally opening. A man with a thick beard approached, and, without ceremony, said, "I saw your name on the radio. You were the last one out." Alexa simply nodded. He added, "You pulled my brother-in-law from the rubble. He doesn't talk about it to this day, but I know, because I was the one who washed the blood off his clothes when he came back." And then, without waiting for an answer, he pulled a badge from his jacket. Not a police badge nor an army badge. It was a handmade piece made of brass and leather with the inscription, "Still Standing." He placed it on the counter and took a step back. It's not official, but it's what we hand out to those who are still standing, even after everything. The attendant, who until then seemed like a shadow leaning in the corner, decided to leave the scene. He excused himself, grabbed his cell phone and disappeared into the back. Maybe he was embarrassed. Maybe he just couldn't stand the atmosphere anymore. But the truth is, he was no longer part of the scene. The store was different now. It was a kind of makeshift barracks, a meeting place, a reunion with everything civilization tries to bury: sacrifice, pain, loyalty. Alexa took a deep breath. Her eyes wandered over faces she'd never seen, but with whom she shared a silent language. The kind of connection born when someone understands what you've been through, even without saying a word. And then someone arrived who made everything stop. An old military jeep parked in front of the store. Noisy, slow, dust-laden. A thin man in a faded uniform and a wooden cane got out. His pace was slow, but his posture still carried something imposing. Alexa recognized him the second he opened the door. Captain Harold, from her old company. One of the few who survived Daggerstorm, and who, as far as she knew, had disappeared from the map. He walked in as if he were coming home. He looked around, and when his eyes met hers, the room fell silent. "Monroe," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. "I told you we'd meet again off the field someday." She smiled, for the first time that day. A small smile, almost restrained but sincere. He approached slowly, and without asking permission, hugged her. A strong hug. Hard. The kind that breaks your armor from the inside out. "You saved my life and the lives of many others, but more than that, you taught me what it means to resist in silence. I should have said that before." The impact of those words was greater than any gunshot. Alexa felt her shoulders for a moment sag, as if she could finally rest, even if only for a few minutes. She no longer needed to explain anything. The truth was there, alive and breathing in the air, in the gestures of each veteran. In the respectful silence of those watching, in the absence of judgment, and above all in the recognition without an audience. But the most unexpected thing was yet to happen, because in that silent crowd, someone was bringing something that no one there expected to see again. Right in the comments, they finally recognized it. There's a revelation coming, and it changes everything. The doorbell jingled again, and then again. Alexa had already lost count of how many had entered. One by one, with measured steps, sober expressions, and trained eyes, veterans filled the store as if obeying an invisible call. No one warned, no one announced, but everyone seemed to know. That store, until then an ordinary place, was now transformed into something completely different. A backstage of reunion, a silent altar of respect. There were no uniforms, there were no flags, just looks. The kind of look that says more than any ceremony. Alexa remained standing, refusing the offered chair, as if her entire body told her she wasn't ready to sit yet. Not here, not anywhere else where the truth had been ignored for so long. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. Shadows invaded the store with the slowness of time passing, when one is amidst memories, and as the veterans settled silently into the corners, something began to form. It wasn't a line or a circle. It was a collective presence, dense and reverent, that settled around Alexa as if they were all there to support her. But inside, she still felt the old battle, the knot in her stomach, the weight of accumulated invisibility. Every face that greeted her brought back the image of another face that never returned. of the comrade who bled in the desert, of the friend who was shot while trying to hold the evacuation line, of the soldier who survived the attack but didn't survive the surroundings. Grief came in waves, and Alexa was learning, right then and there, not to drown in it again. That's when a woman entered. Unlike the others, she carried a small wooden box in her arms, wrapped in dark cloth. Her face was unfamiliar, but her eyes spoke volumes. Alexa had never seen her before, but she felt a strange familiarity. The woman approached, and without saying her name, placed the box on the counter and gently pushed it toward her. This was left with me in 2013. I was asked to keep it until I found you. I never imagined it would be like this. Alexa looked at the box as if it was something radioactive. She was afraid to open it, afraid of what it might contain. But she did. Inside was a letter sealed with the symbol of the unit she commanded on the secret mission. Alongside it was a simple brass pendant engraved with the phrase, "You were our last hope." The handwritten words in the letter were from Captain Aaron Bishop, the first man she carried out of the conflict zone. She thought he was dead. He'd been reported missing, but by all appearances, he'd survived, and spent years trying to locate her. In the note, he recounted how he was captured by local militias and released months later by a coalition operation. He also recounted how upon his return, he discovered that Alexa had been forgotten, that no one spoke of her, that her name had been removed from the reports, as if her presence had been an administrative error. But to him, she was everything. She was the link that kept everyone alive. The words in the letter seemed to burn into every corner of Alexa's chest. Each line was a hole in the shield of indifference she'd spent years building. And when she finished reading, her eyes heavy, she simply closed the envelope and held it to her chest. And at that moment, as if the entire universe were breathing in unison, the veterans there stepped forward. One of the youngest, who looked barely 30, pulled an informal medal from his pocket, the kind awarded between battalions as a form of internal recognition. He walked up to Alexa and, without saying a word, pinned the medal to her grey t-shirt just above her heart. "It's not the government's," he said, "but it's ours, and to us you're more than honoured." Alexa didn't cry, but her eyes spoke for her. For the first time in years, she felt whole, recognized not as a name lost in a restricted report, but as someone who existed, who was seen, who was remembered. The tension in the air gave way to a sense of reparation. The truth that had been hidden for so long now found a voice, and that voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was enough to exist. From across the store, the manager, who had been silently observing everything until then, approached. He was carrying a gun, carefully wrapped as if it were a gift. Alexa didn't understand. He said, "It's not the Sig Sauer you asked for. It's an older one. It was restored by a gunsmith who served in Vietnam. It was his. He died last year and asked to leave it to someone deserving." Alexa opened the package. It was a classic Colt 1911, polished, the barrel still marked from use. On the grip, a faded inscription, "For those who know what it means to return." She held the gun carefully, as if touching something sacred. It wasn't the replacement she'd come for. It was something much greater. It was the answer she never received, the honor never delivered, the silent transformation of someone who, despite everything, remained standing. And there was more. Because at that moment, a pickup truck pulled up in front of the store. An elderly couple stepped out with careful steps. The man wore a jacket embroidered with the name Bishop. Alexa froze. Time seemed to stand still again. She blinked in disbelief. But yes, it was him. Comment here. Some truths take time, but they arrive. His arrival will change everything you imagined until now. The shop door remained ajar, letting in the muffled sound of tires on the dirt road and the timid rustle of leaves in the afternoon wind. But at that moment, nothing seemed to matter beyond the presence looming there, as if the whole world had been waiting for this reunion. Alexa didn't move. Her eyes, already moist, remained fixed on the figure getting out of the truck. The thin legs, the worn cane, the hesitant step, and yet it was him. Captain Aaron Bishop, the man she'd believed dead since the last day of the mission, The same man she'd carried on her shoulders when the evacuation failed. The same man she'd seen collapse in the helicopter, covered in blood and unresponsive in his eyes. But he was there now, walking with difficulty toward the center of the store. His hat clutched in his hand, his breath held, as if each step were a crossing between the past and the present. For a moment no one said anything. Not her, not him. Just the two of them breathing the same air, the same shock, the same recognition. He stopped inches from her. He couldn't kneel. Physically it was no longer possible, but his eyes lowered, not in weakness, but in reverence. "You brought me back," he said. His voice was shaky, but there was a firmness that comes only from someone who has faced death head-on. "But when I came back, you were gone. Your name, your records, your story, everything vanished, as if you had never existed." Alexa nodded, but didn't respond. She was still digesting the fact that he was there, alive, and holding the truth in his hands. Aaron continued, "I spent years searching. I made contacts. I used old connections. All I got was silence. The kind of silence that isn't broken by words, but by actions." He then took a small object, wrapped in a handkerchief, from his inside jacket pocket. He handed it to her. It was the original badge of the Mission Rescue Unit Dagger Storm. A circle of metal darkened by time, with an inscription that only those who were involved in that operation would understand. First in, last out. The motto Alexa recited softly so many times in the years that followed. To herself, when the world seemed to forget she existed. She took the badge with trembling hands. For a second, everything dissolved. The store shelves, the worn floor, the faces around her. Alexa was back on the hot desert sand. Back to the moment he'd refused to leave without his men. Back to the helicopter, where he'd thought he'd lost it. But now, with that small piece of metal in her palm, she realized it hadn't all been in vain. He had returned, and he had looked for her. "You were the reason so many came home, Monroe," Bishop said, his voice even more choked, "including me, and the world may have forgotten you. But we haven't." The words sounded like a sentence of release, like a seal breaking. A weight finally falling away, and at that moment something shifted in the atmosphere. One by one the veterans scattered throughout the store began to approach. No one applauded, no one shouted, but they began to form a semicircle around her. Alexa in the center, holding the badge and the envelope, her eyes full and her soul, for the first time in years, breathing deeply. The manager, still in the background, discreetly turned off the background music playing on the radio. This was no time for distractions. This was time for presence, for listening, for real. And then an unexpected gesture. The first man who had mocked Alexa, the attendant who had offered her the pink pistol when she entered, reappeared. No uniform, no armor. His eyes downcast, his face etched with regret. "I didn't know," he murmured. "I swear I didn't know." Alexa didn't respond immediately. She just stared at him, not angrily, not ironically, but with the look of someone who's seen too much to hold a grudge against people who've never understood the weight of silence. "Few know," she replied finally, "and those who do know almost never talk about it." The boy nodded, then stepped forward. From his hands emerged a box of ammunition, plain, wrapped in brown paper, with a note taped to it. "For those who know what they carry." She took it, more for the gesture than the object itself. There was something in that moment that transcended weapons, ammunition, or military records. It was about legacy, about identity, about rediscovering, amidst the chaos, who one truly is. And when she thought nothing else could happen, Bishop's wife approached with a white envelope in her hands. From inside, she pulled out an old photograph. The image was blurry, but clear enough. Alexa, kneeling beside a fallen soldier, covering him with her own body, with smoke and debris in the background. "This photo was never released," the woman said, "but now it's in the right hands." The image had been taken by a military drone, shortly before the mission's blackout. It was the evidence that never surfaced, the scene no one saw. And yet, it was etched into the subconscious of all who survived. The store was completely silent, and in that silence, there was everything. pain, recognition, transformation, justice. But what no one expected was what the boy from the first visit, the rescued soldier's nephew, had been carrying in his backpack from the start. Something he hadn't revealed yet, and which held a revelation capable of changing even the entire country's perception of who Alexa was. Write it down. The truth always finds a way, because what he carries is the final piece of this story. The boy, standing near the door since the beginning, finally moved. His eyes were alert, carrying more than just curiosity. There was urgency in the way he clutched the strap of his backpack, as if he knew he was carrying something that wasn't just his. Alexa noticed. She sensed these things. She'd learned to identify tension without words. He approached slowly, weaving between the veterans who, without knowing exactly why, parted as if in an ancient rite of passage. No one stopped him. No one asked a question. When he stopped before her, he seemed smaller. His adolescent face trembled slightly, and his breath came in shallow, shallow breaths, as if he had been holding something for too long. The entire store watched in silence. Only the hands of the clock on the wall insisted on moving forward. The boy removed his backpack. He opened it carefully, and from inside he pulled out a thin folder, protected by plastic, with stamps and seals that Alexa recognized immediately. Military documents. Confidential. But what he revealed next made the ground seem to give way beneath her feet. A recording. It was a DVD. Simple, with the date scrawled by hand, September 21st, 2011, and an inscription just below, Extraction, Echo Zone. The boy held it as if it were too fragile for the world. "My uncle gave this to me just before he died," he said. His voice shook, but it came out. "He never wanted anyone to see it. But after he met you, he told me, if you ever meet Alexa Monroe, give this to her. She deserves to know the truth still exists." Alexa felt her heart lurch in her chest. She knew that date. It was the day of the mission, the day the communications went down, the day they said there was no visual record, that everything was lost. But now, before her, was something she never imagined she'd see again. A possible recording of the evacuation, of the final moments, of the ordeal. She reached out, barely daring to touch. Her fingertips found the cool edge of the record. And there, for a second, Alexa felt as if she were touching her own past, a piece of herself that had been ripped away and buried beneath bureaucracy, protocol, and convenient lies. The boy continued. "He told me you were the one who dragged him to the helicopter, that you went back 3 times in that crossfire to rescue people they'd already given up on, and that no one ever knew about it because someone decided it wasn't appropriate to show a woman leading a combat extraction." The silence grew even thicker. This was no longer just a memory. It was a hidden truth finally exposed, a backstage that dismantled the entire facade of meritocracy and recognition of the military structure she served so loyally. Alexa held the disc as if it held a beating heart. Captain Bishop stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the object. He took a deep breath and said, "This video, if it's what I think it is, it shows the exact moment you took command, the moment you saved us all." But Alexa hesitated, not out of fear of the content, but out of the responsibility of what it might mean. She wasn't driven by vanity, never had been. Her entire trajectory had been built in silence, out of the spotlight. But in that moment, she realized it might no longer be about her. Perhaps that recording was a chance to change more than just history itself. It was an opportunity to reopen closed doors for so many others who, like her, were erased from the record. People who returned with scars and found only oblivion. She looked at the store manager, the same man who hours earlier had barely paid her any attention. Now he stood with his hands clasped in front of him, as if awaiting an order. "Is there a TV here?" she asked. The man nodded, discreetly pointing to the back of the store, where an old monitor served more for displaying promotions than anything else. Alexa walked with the DVD in her hands. Her steps were slow but steady, as if every meter toward the device was an emotional journey. When she placed the disc in the tray and pressed the button, all eyes were on her. The screen took a while to come on. Interference. Then, an image. And then what seemed impossible. The mission log. The sound was muffled, hissing, but the images were clear enough. There she was, younger, covered in dust and blood, shouting orders, dragging soldiers along, putting herself between gunfire and wounded. At one point, the camera froze on her, grabbing the shoulder strap of one of the unconscious soldiers and throwing herself with him against a partially destroyed wall. She remembered that moment. She remembered the pain in her fractured rib, the blood dripping from her forehead, the labored breathing of someone who had already gone beyond their limit. But she never imagined someone was recording it. The video continued. It showed the faces that had been there in the store that day, men who now watched themselves, younger, more desperate, being saved by someone the system had tried to erase. And in each look, the impact was visible, the confrontation with their own denial, with their own omission. And there in that moment the transformation began. One by one the store's men approached the screen. Alexa remained standing. She didn't move away. She watched everything with teary but steady eyes. And when the recording ended, there was no applause. There was silence. But a new silence, fraught with reverence but also with responsibility. Aaron Bishop was the first to speak. This video needs to be turned over. This is no longer about a gun, nor about a clean record. It's about changing what needs to be changed. Alexa looked at him, then at the boy, then at the manager. "Keep this copy, but I'll take the original," she said, and everyone understood. That story now could no longer be put back in the drawer. If you've stuck around this far, it's because you felt the weight and value of this story. And maybe, somehow, it touched something deep inside you too. Stories like Sergeant Alexa Monroe's don't come along every day, and when they do, they deserve to be remembered. If this content resonated with you, leave a like. It's a simple gesture, but it shows that there are more people in this world who still care about truth, respect, and legacy. Take advantage and subscribe to the channel. Here, we continue telling stories that don't fit in the headlines, but that fit in the hearts of those who know how to listen. And if you made it to the end, comment below. I heard her silence. I will know that you walked with me until the end. And look, there's a video right here that will move you just as much as this one. Click and stay with me there. The next story is also worth experiencing.